Hello. Got a couple more minutes here before we'll get started, but just make sure my audio is working as people connect up. So. All right, so it's the top of the hour, so we'll get started here. Thanks everyone for joining us. Got just kind of a couple of housekeeping items before we get rolling today with the subject, which is study rules. So first one is the chat, and I'm sending a message through there now, so hopefully it'll pop up and kind of show you where that's at. That's the best place to put questions as we're going through things today. If I get moving a little too quickly, or you have a point of clarification or question that pops in your head, feel free to use that chat. Normally I'll hopefully kind of catch it out of the corner of my eye, or for sure I kind of try to stop and check to make sure that we get any questions I might miss. Also at the very end of the session too, we usually have maybe a few minutes that we can cover any last minute questions too. So the chat is there for that. We are also recording the session today, as we have our other webinars we've done. So out on our website, we'll post the recording from today. So under the resources heading, we have a page for our webinars, kind of showing you the ones we have scheduled soon. And then underneath there are the archives. So if you've missed any of the webinars we've done before and you'd want to watch them again, we have a pretty healthy list and growing there. And later today, you'll see today's recording show up there. So, all right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn off my video just because it puts my face in the corner of the recording than when we post it online. A little easier just to clean that up. So I'll just turn that off here and we'll get rolling. So as I mentioned, today's topic is study rules, and actually kind of our a week-long theme, really. So today we're going to kind of start with square one, start at the beginning with study rules, and really cover just the basics. And we'll just kind of show how you get rolling with them, what they'll do, kind of how they play a part in the validation process when you're looking at the trial, and then I talk about some of the features, and really it's kind of as I layered it out for what I wanted to cover, it's just about a 2-hour session here that will just kind of slowly just transition to more advanced topics as we go, and that will be how we kind of pick up again on Thursday. It's kind of wherever we leave off. When we hit our hour mark, then we'll pick back up on Thursday with some more advanced tips and less commonly used, but maybe just as powerful rules as well. So today we'll start with the basics and just kind of build. So, really overall, the study rules, there's a lot of utility to them and a lot of power. And the main things you can do with them, it's a communication tool where you can point to specific entry fields that somebody should fill in. If you're a sponsor and going to send it to a trialist, it's a nice communication tool for that, or even just internally for those filling it in to highlight important fields. It also is a way to kind of define the requirements in that sponsor, contractor scenario of what needs to be done. You can also restrict some information once it's been entered, kind of prevent changes from being made if that type of information shouldn't change, or you want to put something in and make sure it cannot change in the future. And if there's some confidential information that would be put in the study, you can also hide certain fields and information from others, like outside of your company, so they couldn't see it. And we'll kind of cover all of the rules that can achieve these goals throughout the 2 days. The first ones for sure are kind of the main purpose, and we'll see them today. The second two might be more of the advanced, looking at some of the other rules. So I think I want to start here just by showing a trial. So here we're in ARM, and I just kind of have a dummied up trial here that we'll use to show what rules look like. And so if you've been in a study before and see a red highlight, that is an indication that there is a study rule present. So here in our trial location, I've got the GPS coordinates are kind of highlighted in this pinkish red here. And that means that there's been a study rule that's been put in place that's basically communicating to me, I need to fill these values in. So if I go under the navigation bar, there's an editor specifically to show what study rules have been applied. And you can also get that under the window menu too. So basically, this is just kind of a large table that will continue to grow as you add rules to a study. And essentially, this is telling us that here it is required for the field and the site description, the latitude and the longitude of the lower left corner to be filled in. It is required to fill those in, and the condition is kind of when should it be filled in. So here we have the various trial status items. So as soon as the trial status is marked as established, then I need to fill in the GPS coordinates. We have a third one here. So you can require information be filled in. You could also recommend. So it's a little less strict. It's not quite as adamant about it, but instead it's recommended. If you have this information, you should put it in, please. In this example here, we'll see in the assessment data editor, the rating date field. And that one isn't tied to the trial status. That's actually tied to assessment data. So if we were to go to the assessment data editor, you'll see that rating date. It has a blue color, so it's slightly different color because it's recommended. It's not as urgent, if you will. But essentially, as soon as you have data entered in a column, then that rule will be triggered. So if I were to delete that out, here maybe we haven't actually harvested anything yet, then there really would be no reason to expect that I could fill in a rating date yet. So that rule won't be active until I put in some data. So that's going to be the utility there of the condition to tell when the rule should really kick in. Got a slide kind of to point at these different components here of what a study rule has. And so that first column was called the rule ID. Essentially, it's just the name of the study rule. Those two examples were whether it's a required rule or whether it's recommended. There's some other options as well that we'll see later. The next two columns are essentially, helping you locate where that field is. On what editor will you find it in ARM, and then specifically, what is the name of that entry value that we are talking about, that we're putting a rule onto. The condition, that really sets, how the rule is going to be applied. The rules that we showed there really were a when. When does it kick in? Once the trial status has been to a certain point, then you should know this information, so you should fill it in. Or once you've put in assessment data, now you should know the date that you took it, and so you should fill that rating date in. Some other examples we'll see. It can also be a who. Who does the rule apply to? As well, so just kind of depending on what rule it is. It can be a when, it can be a who, but really it's that rule is being applied and how is it going to be applied. That next column there in the rule editor was to specify either data column numbers or treatment line numbers where the rule would apply to. So if I just toggle real quick back, we had saw on the assessment data that we were applying to all data columns. But technically, if I had wanted to, I could have chosen just particular column numbers to make that rule apply to. If we had a rule that was talking about a treatment column, in the treatments editor, it would be the same thing. You can leave it blank and it'll take all treatment lines this rule should apply to. But if you're really talking about just a particular treatment number, or I guess I should say treatment line, it can be even per component treatment line, then you could specify which line numbers the rule would apply to. The next column is called permissions. And so that is who can modify the rule itself. So essentially, when you add a study rule, you are the owner of the rule, but you can provide particular permissions to decide who else could change the rule. So if I'm hiding confidential information that really should not leave my company, I don't want somebody outside our company to know the information, then it's important that I wouldn't want somebody else outside my company just to remove the study rule. Because then if I remove the rule that hid information, now that information could be available. So I certainly would not want to give permission for just any license at all to change some of my rules. So you can kind of set who can alter that rule, and in theory, take it off if necessary, is really the theory behind that. And usually that defaults to others in my company. Really, in most cases, anyone in your company probably can have access to that, but you can specify only my license, or only or even loosen up to, well, anyone can change it if needed. I just had a question here kind of about the rule ID, that there's one about create GUID. So we'll cover that on Thursday. We'll kind of go through some of those other ones. That one in particular doesn't have a huge usage, but we'll make sure to cover all of those different items in the rule ID. Let me just flip to there so you can see what we're looking at in the rule ID. There's quite a few different ones, as well as just the required and recommended, and we'll cover all of those on Thursday for sure, and maybe we'll get to a few of them today even, the different options there. So. All right, so those are kind of the main components of a study rule, and really what makes up the rule that you're defining. And we'll show some examples and kind of see how they get applied, and then go through all the different combinations, because sometimes the particular items are sensitive to what we're talking about, and so we'll cover those various combinations. So hopefully they'll make a little more sense once we run through a few of them. So we just kind of looked at what a rule does. The most basic rules, those required and recommended ones, really we're telling people you need to fill in this piece of information and a particular at a particular time even. And so the way to check those rules and make sure, as I fill in information, that I am abiding by those rules and I haven't neglected to fill something in that I'm supposed to, we use trial validation or even protocol validation. You can do this both in a protocol file and a trial file. And so really, it's a short little process that ARM will run for you, and there's a couple of things ARM will do. And the first thing is it's going to refresh automatic entry fields. So anything that is calculated kind of automatically is going to refresh and make sure that those are up to date. Then it will perform some handy cross checks. So there might not be a particular rule that's been applied yet for those areas, but just really common, obvious things like if I was in my rate, my treatment rate, and I had put in a number, I told it 3, but I forgot to say gallons per acre, and so I only have a 3 but no unit. Well, ARM will find that cross check, and it's pretty obvious I was supposed to put in that piece of information, but forgot to. And so ARM can help find some of those things. There's some date checking as well, and we'll see some examples too where ARM can kind of make sure that it was logical what date you've entered. So if I put in an assessment date of 2019 instead of 2020, it'll flag that and say, hey, all of your applications and your treatment dates, those are all in 2020. What are you doing telling me you took an assessment in 2019? Things like that, just to check for consistency, things that ARM can do for you. And then finally, kind of the big portion of the validation is to verify the rules. So it's going to go down that list in that editor and make sure that you're fitting the rules. And so there are some, kind of depending on the study definition that you're using, there are some rules within the study definition that might be applied. But most common and most often we're talking about the user-defined, the study rules on the editor. So I've got kind of an example study here that will open up kind of to show that process. And we'll see some examples of each of those. So I'm going to open my study list. And I have a tutorial file that will be handy. So it's validate your trial. And actually the tutorial study list, if you haven't encountered that before, it's the same on everyone's computer. So there's just some example files that we include with the ARM installation that everyone has on their computer. And they're named to try to give you an idea of what feature or example that it may be giving. and they're totally, you know, open to mess around with. So you can open it up and kind of see examples of what's going on, you know, run some reports and tweak the data, whatever you'd like to do. You can mess around with those just kind of as a learning tool. And I like to use them in trainings too, because it's an example then that everyone could open up on their computer if they wanted, or, you know, if you're watching the recording, you could go step by step through it as well. So this one is validate your trial, and I use it in our tutorial video about validation as well. So, and it looks like I made a copy of this as well. So yeah, I want to clear out any identification there so I don't have duplicates. So here in this study, you'll notice I have a few study rules that are applied. It really doesn't matter where you are in your trial. So maybe I just got done entering data or something. Kind of wherever you're at, it's a good idea to validate as you kind of finish up making some changes in a study. So under the Tools menu, there's this option to validate trial. You could also click the little checkbox on the toolbar button if you'd like. That'll run the same validation process. And so ARM is going to churn through that list that we just had in our PowerPoint slide of the items it's going to check. And so here, as soon as it finds something wrong, it's going to stop and give us the first thing it found wrong. So it says that there's a required treatments field is blank. Form concentration in treatment line 5. Kind of what's handy here is ARM will just take our hand and bring us right to the problem. So here in treatment line 5, I've specified a formulation unit, but I forgot to put in a number. So that's one of those just cross checks, kind of an obvious thing from ARM's standpoint. You know, it wouldn't be able to really know whether my 75% is technically right for my super stop, but it will know that I didn't fill this in. So it can help me out and make sure that I have just kind of obvious consistency things are in place. So there's one that I just forgot to put in my number. So that's awesome. We can run that validation then again to see if I have any other problems. So now that one passed just fine, but the next thing it found is that there is a required header field. It's in the assessment data header, the rating date in data column 1. And it kind of tells us that this is actually being triggered from study rule number 1 is why we're seeing this message. So in other words, we have a study rule that is requiring that we fill in the rating date, and we have not fulfilled that rule. So really that's kind of the biggest goal of the validation is to check and ensure that we are fulfilling all of the study rules. So to kind of hopefully answer that question about the validation, depending on the rules being completed, it's actually that validation is really the process for you to ensure that you are completing those rules is really the goal of it. So here we can say okay, and again, ARM will just hop us to that spot where we've offended that rule. And so sure enough, here at that rating date, I have data that's been entered in this column, but I did not put in the date. So I'll just pick today's date to have that filled in. Under the tools menu, we could continue to validate trial and just hop to the next one and the next one. And ARM will just keep kind of pulling us along to cover all of the issues that it finds. But if we were to encounter something that maybe I can't quite finish just yet, or I would just kind of want to see an overall list of all of the errors and things I need to fix, you can use this validate trial log errors. And so ARM won't stop at the first problem it finds, but it'll run through all of its checks and then just give us a to-do list, if you will, at the end. So here now is the list of problems. So we have a list of errors. We have quite a few, I guess, to still take out. And you can see it looks like our rating date is going to be a problem again for columns 3 and 4. That comes from study rule number 1. Now we've also got our GPS coordinates, it looks like. Study rules number 2 and 3 we need to fill in. And then there's an issue with our established date is later than an application date. And then there's also a section of warnings. So we'll look at the study rules editor to see that there is a difference between study rule 4 and study rules 1 through 3 as to why this becomes a warning. And it's because we have a recommended study rule. So if we go over there, that's another one of those differences as we had showed the required versus recommended, is that here it's only recommended that we fill in the GPS accuracy. So it doesn't come in as a warning, or excuse me, it doesn't come in as an error that that you have to fill it in, but it's a little bit lower on the totem pole. It's a warning to say, hey, we'd like you to fill this in, but we're not going to stop the show if you don't. So we'll kind of show that towards the end as well. But if we continue then to take out some of these rules, we'll go back to that assessment data. I'm just going to hit the space bar to fill in today's date quick. So that way we can kind of take care of that rule number 2, or rule number 1, I should say. If we look at our list again, we took care of those. So now the next one is in the site description. Maybe I'll just continue to use that checkbox so that way ARM can just keep dragging me across my trial to the spots I need to take care of. So now if I fill in my GPS coordinates here in Brookings, South Dakota, I won't do too deep, but we'll do get us close enough that we won't be like sitting in the ocean or anything crazy. So now let's validate again. Okay, so that kind of took care of those first 3 rules. We've got one more, and this is just another example of one of those cross checks, kind of the consistency things that ARM can help out with. So it's pointing out here that we have our establishment date here in the study is April of 2019, and yet one of our application dates is marked as May of 2018. So if I go to my application, I'll see that I had accidentally picked the wrong year in application A. So application B was fine. I meant May of 2019, but I managed to put in the wrong date there. And let's see if that fixed the error. And it does. So it's one of those little things that might be pretty hard to catch as you just kind of enter things in. But ARM can kind of help out with things like that as well. Even though there wasn't a specific rule that we had applied, it's something that's kind of found in that study definition, some of the intelligence, if you will, of the fields. ARM can kind of make sure that the dates that you're entering are somewhat logical relative to each other. Okay, so we fixed all of the errors, and so you'll notice now that we're actually told when we validate that the trial is valid. So there are no more errors. There's no more required rules that we have still to fix. We have achieved all of those. There's nothing we haven't filled in that we're required to, and thus the trial is valid. At the same time, we do still have a recommended rule that we haven't fixed. And so that's kind of that important line between the required and the recommended. Is ARM says that you can't proceed, this is not valid yet if you haven't fulfilled all of the required rules. But the recommended, it's softer. We'll say you can continue, everything is okay enough if you haven't fulfilled all the recommended, but we will give you a list to show the ones that you should still fill in if you can. So if you're the sponsor, or if you're the protocol writer planning things, you'll want to consider, how important the piece of information is that you're creating a rule for. Is it a strong enough requirement? Is it important enough for you that it's truly not valid for somebody to submit data without that piece of information? or is it something that you would like to communicate that they should include, but it's not a showstopper? You wouldn't want them to have to wait to hand you the data without that piece of information in there. So here in this case, it was the GPS accuracy. Yeah, it'd be pretty nice if you had that, but you know, if the trialist doesn't have that information, you know, that's okay. As long as I get my coordinates, that's definitely the most important aspect of it, if you will. So you can certainly go to that field. Again, you can see that lighter blue there to tell us we should fill that value in, and you know, maybe I've got 5-meter accuracy or something on that. Now if I validate again, it says trial is valid and I don't have any other messages. So now literally all of the rules have been satisfied, and there's not even any warnings or anything. So those are just some examples of the different rules and kind of the different things that ARM does in the validation process. You know, the biggest one certainly is to check all of your study rules that have been applied, but there's a few other things that go on as well. And so it's a very nice tool to take advantage of and to utilize when you're in the trial and in the protocol as well. So if you're creating a protocol, you can do that protocol validation too. It would be under the tools menu. It's going to be in the very same place. It'll just say validate protocol instead of validate trial. Now, you know, that was a little bit of a process to go through each of those, but certainly that doesn't mean it's going to take that long each time you validate. You know, so I had kind of crafted that example specifically to show a lot of different combinations. But what I recommend people do is to validate a lot. And really, if I were doing it, I've never done research before, but I think if I was working on trials, pretty much any time that I'd go into a trial and put in some data, change some things, you know, kind of each session I would have opening up a trial, I would want to validate when I'm done. So I'm about ready to close the trial, I'm done with it, and just hit the validate button. And that way I can check any of the changes I just made to make sure I haven't forgot to put something in, haven't triggered another rule, things like that. And really, if you do that a lot, now you're only going to have a few fixes to put in. You know, so, you know, here it took us a long time to get through, you know, what was it, you know, a half dozen errors that we had, which was admittedly handcrafted to show the errors, but really, the validation that's running, it's really only going to validate the changes you've made since your last validation when you made everything correct. So if you're doing it a lot, there's only going to be maybe 1 or 2 things maximum that you would do. So it's a good time saver. You know, if you wait kind of the whole trial season before you validate, now everything you've ever entered is up for grabs and going to be validated. And that might take some time to sit and poke through all of those. If you just did the quick hitters each time you were in there, it's going to save you a lot of time. And there's not a lot of overhead as far as just going up to hit that little checkbox is the only overhead you have for doing those, you know, each and every time. And then the other perk there is that you're always ready for sharing. So, you know, each time that you open the trial and put in information, if you validated, then you can be really confident when, you know, your sponsor says, hey, can you send me an update? Or somebody says, I need to check on a file and see, you know, where you're at in this trial. You can send that right away because you know you validated, you know you're not missing any information. And so the information you send, you know, it'll be all ready, and you know you won't have missed something silly that you regret later. You wish you had noticed before you sent it, type of thing. So there's a question here, if there is any way to prevent a trialist from sending back to the sponsor a trial where he totally disregarded the required study rules. There's kind of a limitation a little bit in the rules as far as it does require the trialist to validate. You know, if you've worked in some of the corporate customizations. Like Bayer has a customization. They have just a little bit slightly different flavor of ARM, BASF. Some of those companies have their own, and they might have some things in theirs where you simply can't submit without validating. But kind of in the standard definitions, there really isn't a way explicitly to prevent a trialist from avoiding the validation. Some of the troubles is if we were to put something in that said you can't close the file until it's valid or something like that, that'd really be the only way to achieve that end, where a trialist then can't possibly save and close a trial without having it valid. Well, that's going to create tons of headaches and really would not be fair for anyone working in the file if they had to go and wanted to come back and return to fix those problems or things like that. So there's some practical limitations to totally locking it down so a trialist would have no option to get around it. But usually in training, I'll say that, included in your contract when you're, communicating to the trialist to do the work, to say that, we're going to send you an ARM file and we expect that it would be validated when you send it back. And if I was in that situation of the sponsor, I would, as soon as, receive a study back, I'd open it up in ARM and hit validate. And if it's not valid, then I'd send an email back. I need a trial that's valid, that passes validation before I can start processing this. So there might not be a mechanism specifically in the software to require a trialist to do so, but certainly ARM can help by you can simply say you need to, in your ARM file, validate and send me a valid trial from ARM's standpoint. Otherwise, I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to accept it until it's valid, type of thing. So I think you can use that as leverage, but no, there's not a technical switch to require that. Will ST accept a trial that is not validated? I believe so. So I don't think ST will open up a trial and perform any validation on it in order, and gate things that way when you're doing the analysis. So really, that's kind of up to you as far as validating trials. I've kind of heard through support interaction that some companies perhaps they'll have a person that receives the studies, make sure it's valid, and maybe they put the files in a particular folder that's stating that it's been validated, that they go through their data processing, maybe their data review, and then once it's ready to be summarized, perhaps it goes into a separate folder, or maybe they tweak the file name, maybe to do a save as or something, if they save it to another location to say this has been validated and ready for analysis. Things like that you could do. Or if you have like the ATD, the ARM trial database, that's a nice way too, that no one, the data uploaders who would upload to the database, that they first validate the study and make sure that it's valid before it even gets into the database. And so then that way, when you're using ST, you know that those files are validated. So that's another one where it is a little bit of that human element to manage those things. That there's not necessarily an automatic switch for that. So yeah, really, really great questions. All right, so that's really the basics of study rules. Without diving into a lot of the other rules, and there's certainly a lot of capability that some other rules can unlock. But that's really the basis of what rules will do. And then that validation kind of comes hand in hand with the rules. It's kind of the next thing I wanted to show then today, if we had time, and we certainly do, is the idea of a rule set. And it's kind of falls in line with a lot of other features in ARM that we've covered here in some of our webinars, where really, once you work on setting things up the way you like them in a particular trial, then you can encapsulate that configuration and use it over and over again in other files and across years and share them with others. And so the rule set is just right in line with those other tools. Like there's report sets, there's SEs, things that we've covered in the past here in these webinars that do the same function. And so here with study rules, when you have a list of rules that are being applied to a trial here, you can save that list into a file and reuse that in other locations and have other ARM users use that as well too. So we'll do that example here just with this list. So let's just say this is our list. It's quite short. Chances are there's probably more information that you would want, but we'll just practice here with rules here. We say this is really our important list. And if you're a protocol writer and want to try to kind of figure out how to start in, how to know what I should include, what I would recommend is going into a trial. Whether it was last year's trial that had been done, or if you're just starting out with ARM entirely, just create a dummy protocol and create a dummy trial. And you can just kind of go through each field in the trial, and when you find something that's important to you that you would want to have a rule for, then you can right click. So here, let's say that we'll go like the application. I want to make sure that I get some of the weather details for my application. It's real important to know what the temperature was at application, for example. So you can just right click on that field, and kind of this last section in the right click menu are related to the study rules. So here I can require that the air temperature be filled in when I have an application date filled in. And so you can kind of keep doing that. Relative humidity, that's not important, but I do want the wind. So I can require that gets filled in with assessment date. Soil moisture, I would like to know that, but it's not required. So I'll recommend that gets filled in. At any rate, you can go through a trial and mark all of the fields that you would want to require or recommend. And that will build the list here in that trial. So even as a protocol writer, do that, and you can then save all of those rules into this rule set that then you can put into your protocol. And so really, the idea being when you're in a protocol, you don't necessarily see all of those data fields that you do in a trial. And it can be a bit of a pain, although you could technically do it. You could manually add in a rule and say, I want to require a field in the site description. It's on the contacts tab. I need the sponsor email. And that should probably be when I establish the trial. You can see how that would get pretty long and arduous awfully quickly. So it's pretty slick, and just to be doing the right click, and you can visualize the fields that you need. So even if you're a protocol writer, I'd recommend as you start to look at adding rules is to get into a trial file, whether it's just a dummy trial file or something that you have seen before. That way you can visually see all the fields that you'll be asking for and what they would need. And it's a lot quicker to do the right click and add those rules. So, kind of once you have your list built, then there's the buttons here at the bottom, and there's one to save your rule set. So here now, it's prompting us to save the file. And if you've been with us for some of these other webinars, it's kind of in the same magical location here where we store a lot of those customization things, those personalizations that we do, like report sets and those SEs that we've done. They all kind of land right here. And so for a rule set, it just has a different file extension, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot to you what it's called, but it's RLS rule set. It doesn't matter a whole lot because ARM will, when you want the rule set, that'll be what it chooses. But here we can just choose a file name. And I kind of recommend trying to be descriptive with what you're naming, what set that you're creating here. And maybe this is, my standard, we'll call them GDM, so company. So my standard GDM rules, it is my baseline. So something you can do with rules is these sets are additive. And so I could create a library of different sets of sets, for lack of a better term, a grouping of sets. So maybe I have particular rules for my herbicide trials. There's certain fields that I really need to make sure that get required in those. But now if I'm doing seed treatment, it's totally different ballgame on really what I need to have recorded. And so I can make kind of a baseline of no matter what study I'm in, I need these certain fields. And then when I'm writing a protocol for an herbicide study, I'll load in that other set I saved of my herbicide rules. And then if I'm in a protocol where we're playing our seed treatments, I can load that set that I created of our seed treatment rules. And so you can load multiple sets on top of each other and continue to build the list for a given file. So here we'll just call this our baseline. These are the most important ones. Doesn't matter where we're at, and just a longer description of what I'm saving here is really what we're asking for at this spot. And so now ARM has saved that set to my computer, so I can use over and over and over again. So let's, if I create a new protocol, and I'll just create kind of an empty shell here. So when I'm ready to plan out my next experiment, I can go over to the study rules. I've got one here already in place. Let me just clear that one out. And so we start with an empty list here, and I can load that rule set. And so here ARM will just ask, these are the various rule sets that I've created on my computer. And so this is the one we just saved. And there's that description. So that's kind of, ARM gives an option for a little bit more information if you wanted. And it'll show up as we're choosing them. So now when I say okay, all of those rules that were in that other trial that we saved into our file all get loaded then into this study. So like I said, if I wanted to, I could load another one, so that's my baseline. Every single one of my studies, I want to have those rules, but now here I'm in a, I don't really have one that's called herbicide. We'll just pretend that this is the certain type of study. Looks like I had created it in one of our trainings, but maybe this one is also relevant. Well, this one had quite a few more rules, so now we're up to 42. But you'll see when you're clicking into a rule, it will tell you what rule set it came from. So that first list here were our baseline. Now if I scroll down here to like number 28, you can see that's where this rule came from. So if you're working backwards and trying to figure out, how come this rule is even here? Oh yeah, because I loaded it in from my herbicide, or yeah, this is a baseline. I need to have this in all the time, things like that. But it's a nice tool for duplicating and making sure you have the same rules applied in all of your studies. If you're the protocol writer, making sure that all the trials we send out will have that those same requirements in them. But even the trialist, if you're a trialist and you want to have your own personal rule set of things, I want to make sure I fill in, even if the sponsor doesn't specifically ask for them, I want to make sure that I always fill in my rating date as soon as I put in data. Or when I fill in an application, I want to make sure that I put in weather information or this and that. So even if you're not specifically trying to provide instructions to someone else, this can be really a nice self-check tool too. And you can have your own rule set that's my baseline. And even if you receive a study from somebody else, from a sponsor, and they have rules present, you can simply load in your personal rules set on top of them. So the study rules, they're additive, and you can just keep adding more and more to them, whether you add more with a rule set, or if you manually wanted to add more, or go across and before you start, I want to require my rating date. So I'll make sure to require that with assessment data, things like that. You can apply those rules when you receive the study as well. Just one thing to note with that, that as you add more rules through more sets, through the right click, rules are additive, but they are not contradictory. So if I receive a study and it requires that I fill in the rating, the rating unit, for example, I can't try to load a rule set that only recommends the rating unit. ARM isn't going to suddenly deprecate then and say, oh, well, there's also a recommended rule, so I won't make that an error. That will kind of override the required rule that was defined earlier. That won't happen. So ARM won't allow contradictions to occur, whichever one is more stringent. If I have required something at any point, then there is no way that someone could later make it easier, and make it only recommended and kind of downgrade that rule, if you will. So that's one protection there. If you do put a rule in place and send the file on, there's no workarounds. There's no way that somebody can get around the rule once you have it in place. And really the only example counter to that would be if you had the permissions. So here I have the permission set to anyone. So if anyone else were to open the study and they ran into this required rating unit and they didn't want to fulfill it for whatever reason, any other license could delete that rule out of the list. So that would be one reason where typically I think the default is everyone in my company. I must have saved, yep, so these rules that we had did earlier were everyone in my company. This rule set I had was using anyone, which might not be super helpful in that case. But everyone in my company will make sure that people outside my company can't just delete out rules so they don't have to follow them, things like that. So that's really the only case where a rule that you define could be altered or superseded or something would be if the permissions were set so that you open the door to that. But otherwise, there's no way to get around those things. So that's really, I guess, all that I was hoping to cover today. Was really introducing the rules, showing some examples of really just the most basic flavor of rules, which are the required and recommending a field. Like I said, we alluded to it a few times. Thursday session, we're just gonna step through all those different options. There's various rule IDs. There's some other conditions and things as well that have other functionality. And on Thursday we'll just kind of go through all of those options. question here. Do the columns have a default mode, or do you have to pick permissions for each rule? Yeah, so the permissions should default to whatever you chose last time. So if I were to hand choose this rule here, actually as soon as I click required, you'll see that it fills that permissions in. And so I had last thing I had chosen was everyone in my company, so ARM will continue to choose what you picked last time. And that's a good recommended one. But if I were to switch it to anyone, for example, then the next rule that I create, whether it's through the right click or just adding it here, it's going to use that permission that you chose last. So there's not necessarily a set as default, but ARM will grab and use the permission that you had used last time, essentially. And certainly you can, if you want to later, change it. But that's what ARM does for when you add rules. Great question. And I guess I didn't really mention it, but actually there is one other component here of the rule, and I'm not sure how often it is used, but there is a rule details where you can just put in more information. If I could type properly, more information, instructions, rationale. I'm not sure what all people may use that for, but kind of just a handy spot to put some information if you needed to. Here in the protocol, it's maybe some instructions or a reason for why I'm putting this rule on, so the trialist can see that. Things like that. Really just an open spot to slip in some information if it's needed. I open up that trial here. Still have that duplicate there. So those rule details were from the protocol. And so they may or may not be filled in. And then when you're in a trial, you get one more free column. And so that can be a spot where the trialist could put their communication, maybe their response. You have a mini conversation there. So another spot, if the trialist used the rule details in the protocol, the trialist also has a spot to put in details. I'm not sure what the limit is there. I would imagine that eventually you would run out of room. Seems like it's pretty good length. So I would imagine there's probably some sort of limit. There is no formatting to it, but seemed like you get quite a bit of space there at least. So that seemed like a pretty healthy length there, but I would imagine there's some sort of limit, but seems like it's a pretty decent length there. If you did have some information, it is going to be a little bit limited to how readable it is, since there's not a lot of formatting or anything, but gives you an option if you did need to get a little wordy, you'd have a spot there. So. Actually, I guess one more thing we could show here. So if you have just a couple minutes, and certainly if you have some questions, feel free to keep popping those in. Can you open each cell to see the entire comment? Yeah, I think this is kind of a table, so we could maybe resize the rule details. Will let me resize the comment. I'm not totally sure. Since it's on the end there, it might just be, I don't know if it's being a little stubborn for me or not. If you'd be able to resize, you might be able to resize that column, and I'm just struggling to hit that right spot where it'll let me do that. I'm not sure. I can maybe play around with that a little bit. I think that's the ARM. Yeah, that's just my other window here. let me open up another ARM window quick, and I'm going to switch to a different license and open up that file there, just to show that if you see a rule that you haven't added yourself, so that was the owner ID is the person, and we'll kind of go in a little more detail Thursday as well, but when you add a rule, you become the owner of that. And we alluded to those permissions as to who can edit the rule. And so the permissions is everyone in my company, and so I just logged in with a license that has a different company than the license that was used to create this file, and the license that I was just logged in as. And so I don't have permission to edit these rules. And so you'll notice as I click in here, I can't change anything. It's all read only, it's locked down because I don't have the permission to edit those. I certainly can add my own, like we had mentioned. So if I wanted to, I can put in my information, what I need to have, and you'll see that I have a different owner ID. This is your GDM ID code, and I'll show you kind of how that all shapes out on Thursday. But just kind of wanted to show what it would look like for someone else. So if you're that protocol writer, this is what the trialists will see. They won't be able to edit the rule. They can't change it. They can't delete it. You can't do anything with it if you're outside the bounds of those permissions that have been set. And if I were to load a rule set, if I standard my baseline here, you'll see I'm the owner of all those rules that we just added because I added that rule set. And I can continue to edit those if I want, since I'm the owner of them. But I cannot and will not be able to change those rules as they aren't in my realm of being able to edit. All right, well, we pretty much hit our 1 hour target here. Any way to sort the study rules? I don't believe so. They're kind of, yeah, some of them you can click the title there and it doesn't seem like they're going to change. That might be something, that might be a nice update that we could add. I know it's on our list. We'd like to do that in the treatments editor. You can't you can't sort or the assessment data editor. You can't sort by data. So I think we're trying to figure out the best way to develop that, and I think that'd be a good trickle down to get all these other tables in ARM to make it sort. So that's a good question, Jamil, but currently not. Currently it's kind of stuck with the order you have it in. A little tip, if you do use your navigation bar in parentheses behind the study rules, it will tell you how many have been completed. So this shows 4 out of 9 have been satisfied. This was our validate your trial example. So I'm sure if we validate and log errors, you're going to see those errors we had before. So there's quite a few that looks like we're missing 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that aren't being fit. So really only 4 of them are even done in the sense that we're satisfying them. That's just a nice quick one, especially as you get more and more rules. A nice summary, at least, to see kind of where you're at. If you're working through a trial and to see if there's some that aren't. So. All right, well, unless you have questions, hopefully maybe we'll be seeing most of you again on Thursday as well. And we'll just kind of pick up where we left off here. We'll go through all of those other rules. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit about the ownership of the rules as well and the permissions. There's some subtleties to there that we'll kind of cover, and then we'll just talk about all the different types of rules. So, you know, thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll be talking to you soon later this week. So.